In the early 2000s, before the world knew their voices, before the stages lit up with orchestras and standing ovations, before Il Volo became a name synonymous with timeless Italian music, there were three boys. Just boys. They lived in different parts of Italy, separated by miles and circumstances, unaware that their futures would one day converge. They were not yet stars. They were not yet a phenomenon. They were children carrying the weight of ordinary lives, made heavier by dreams they weren't sure they had permission to chase. Piero Barone grew up in Naro, a small Sicilian town where everyone knew everyone, where voices carried across narrow streets and privacy was a luxury no one could afford. His voice, even as a child, was impossible to ignore. It filled rooms without effort, soared above conversations, demanded attention he didn't always want. While other children blended into the background of their own lives, Piero stood out. And standing out, in a place where conformity felt safer, came with a price. He was called different. He was teased for the way he sang, for the passion that poured out of him when he opened his mouth, for the seriousness with which he approached music while his peers kicked footballs in dusty fields. His family loved him, believed in him, but belief doesn't erase loneliness. Piero spent many afternoons alone, singing to himself, wondering if the thing that made him special would also be the thing that kept him isolated forever. Gianluca Ginoble, from the small town of Roseto degli Abruzzi on the Adriatic coast, was a boy of deep feeling. He wore his heart openly, sometimes too openly for a world that often rewarded toughness over tenderness. Music moved him in ways he couldn't explain, but discipline, sitting still, following rules, staying focused when his mind wandered, was a constant struggle. Teachers saw potential, but also distraction. His family saw talent, but also a boy who needed direction. Gianluca felt the weight of being overlooked, of being the sensitive one, the emotional one, the one who cried during songs and couldn't always articulate why. He feared being dismissed as too soft, too unfocused, too much, and not enough all at once. Music was his refuge, but it was also a mirror that reflected back every insecurity he carried. Could a voice like his, pure, aching, vulnerable, ever be enough in a world that seemed to favor strength? Ignazio Boschetto was quieter than the others, more reserved, a boy who kept his doubts locked inside. Born in Bologna but raised with Sicilian roots, he existed between worlds, never quite feeling like he fully belonged to either. His voice was there, always there, a gift he recognized but didn't fully trust. Self-confidence was a battle fought in silence. He watched other singers, older and more experienced, and wondered if he would ever measure up. There was a need in him, an urgency to prove that he wasn't just good, but worthy of attention, worthy of success, worthy of being heard. But proving oneself is exhausting when you're still a child, when you're supposed to be playing and learning and making mistakes without consequence. Ignazio carried a quiet pressure, the kind that settles in your chest and never fully leaves. Music, for all three of them, was not about fame. Not yet. It was escape. It was the one place where the world made sense, where the chaos of childhood, poverty, expectations, uncertainty about the future, faded into something beautiful. They sang because they had to, because not singing felt like suffocating. Then came the talent shows. Italy had a tradition of them, programs that scoured the country for young voices, plucking children from obscurity and thrusting them into national television. Ti lascio una canzone was one such show, a platform that celebrated classic Italian music through the voices of children and teenagers. For Piero, Gianluca, and Ignazio, it was an opportunity. But opportunities, especially for the young, often come wrapped in terror. The reality of entering a national competition at such a tender age was nothing like the polished performances viewers saw from their living rooms. Behind the scenes, there were endless rehearsals, hours that stretched into exhaustion. There were vocal coaches who pushed them, sometimes gently, sometimes not, demanding perfection from bodies and minds still learning how to exist in the world. There was harsh criticism, the kind that cuts deep when you're 14, 15 years old and still figuring out who you are. There were adult competitors, seasoned performers who viewed these boys as obstacles, as threats despite their youth. The judgment was public. Millions watched. Millions formed opinions. And these were children, standing under lights, voices shaking not just from nerves but from the sheer weight of performing under pressure that most adults would crumble beneath. There were moments, quiet moments that cameras never captured, where fear took over, where Piero wondered if his voice, so different from everyone else's, would be celebrated or ridiculed, where Gianluca felt the familiar creep of self-doubt, the voice in his head whispering that he wasn't disciplined enough, focused enough, strong enough, where Ignazio stood backstage, hands trembling, wondering if this performance would be the one that proved he didn't belong after all. They were exhausted. They were insecure. They were children pretending to be professionals because that's what was expected. And then something unexpected happened. During one of these competitions, someone, a producer, a director, a person whose vision saw beyond individual performances, decided to put them together. 3 boys, 3 voices, one group, Il Volo, the flight. It wasn't destiny. It felt like confusion. They didn't know each other, not really. They were strangers bound by circumstance, by the decision of adults who saw potential in their combined sound. Piero, Gianluca, and Ignazio stood together for the first time, uncertain and afraid, wondering how 3 such different personalities and voices could possibly blend into something cohesive. The fear of failure hung heavy. What if it didn't work? What if audiences rejected them? What if this was the end before it even began? Those early days of Il Volo were marked by tension. 3 strong-willed boys, each with their own way of singing, their own approach to music, suddenly expected to harmonize not just vocally, but emotionally. Piero's powerful, operatic voice demanded space. Gianluca's tender lyrical tone needed room to breathe. Ignazio's rich, warm sound anchored them, but finding balance was a daily negotiation. They argued, they clashed, they struggled to understand each other while simultaneously trying to be understood. And beneath it all was homesickness, a longing for the simplicity of their old lives, for family dinners and familiar streets, and the freedom to be just boys. Loneliness settled in differently for each of them. Piero missed Naro, missed the simplicity of being known. Gianluca ached for the Adriatic coast, for the sound of waves and the comfort of home. Ignazio withdrew into himself, processing the rapid changes in the only way he knew how. Quietly, internally, without burdening others. The future felt fragile. It felt like glass that could shatter with one wrong note, one bad performance, one moment of weakness. Then came exposure. After their formation, Il Volo appeared on television, their voices reaching millions across Italy and beyond. Recognition came fast, too fast. One day they were relatively unknown. The next, people recognized them on the street. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt overwhelming. With recognition came criticism, brutal and unrelenting. Classical crossover music, the blending of operatic technique with popular melodies, was dismissed by purists who saw it as a bastardization of true opera. The boys were too young. Their genre was too niche. Their appearance, their youth, their very existence seemed to invite ridicule from those who couldn't understand what they were trying to do. They faced mockery for their age. Critics questioned whether teenage boys could possibly understand the emotional depth of the songs they performed. They were called pretty faces, manufactured products, a gimmick designed to sell nostalgia to older generations. The pressure to represent Italian musical tradition at such a young age created an emotional strain that rarely showed on stage. How do you carry the weight of centuries of cultural heritage when you're barely old enough to drive? How do you defend your artistry when the world tells you you're not legitimate? Behind the scenes, sacrifices accumulated like debts. Childhood, That sacred time of exploration and mistake-making and carefree joy was traded for rehearsals and recording sessions and international flights. Education became fragmented, squeezed between performances, tutors replacing classrooms, learning happening in hotel rooms and tour buses instead of among peers. Friendships from before, the ones built in schoolyards and neighborhood streets, faded. Not from malice, but from distance. Their friends were living normal teenage lives, attending parties, falling in love, making memories, while Piero, Gianluca, and Ignazio existed in a parallel world of spotlights and expectations. The loss of a normal teenage life is something difficult to quantify. It's the absence of first dances and spontaneous adventures, of lazy summers and the freedom to fail without millions watching. It's the isolation that comes from success, the realization that you're living a dream many would envy, while simultaneously grieving the ordinary experiences you'll never have. And beneath it all was the weight of representing families who depended on their success. Not in a cruel way, but in the way families do when one member's achievement becomes everyone's hope. Their parents had sacrificed too, time, money, stability, to support their son's dreams. That support came with an unspoken pressure. Don't let us down. There were moments when quitting felt not just possible, but necessary. Vocal strain plagued them as their bodies changed, as adolescents transformed their instruments in ways they couldn't control. Voices crack. Ranges shift. What worked at 14 doesn't work at 16, and the fear of not growing into their voices, of losing what made them special, was constant. Mental fatigue set in from the relentless schedule, the performances that never seemed to end, the travel that blurred countries and cities into one exhausting continuum. They watched peers their age living different lives, easier lives, and comparison became a thief of joy. Doubts about longevity crept in. The music industry is ruthless, particularly to young artists. For every success story, there are countless others who burned bright and faded fast. Would Il Volo be remembered, or would they become a footnote, a novelty act that couldn't sustain? The industry whispered that they were too young, too inexperienced, too different. Every setback, every harsh review, every moment of struggle fed the fear that maybe everyone was right. But something else was happening beneath the struggle. Something harder to see but impossible to deny. Hardship was forging a bond between them. The very difficulties meant to break them were binding them together. Piero, Gianluca, and Ignazio began to understand that they were not competitors, but companions. They shared something that no one else could fully comprehend. The unique pressure of their position, the strange duality of being celebrated and criticized, the loneliness of a very public life. Friendship became more than camaraderie. It became survival. They learned to trust each other in ways that went beyond music. Trust that when one of them was struggling, the others would carry the weight. Trust that vulnerability wasn't weakness, but connection. Trust that their differences, the very things that caused early tension, were actually their greatest strength. Piero's power, Gianluca's emotion, Ignazio's warmth. Together, they created something none of them could achieve alone. Shared struggle became the foundation of something unbreakable. Their voices matured alongside their emotional resilience. The technical growth was evident. Stronger control, deeper understanding of their craft, the confidence that comes from thousands of hours of practice. But the emotional maturity was perhaps more profound. They learned how to support each other on stage, how to communicate without words, how to lift each other when doubt crept in. They learned that success wasn't measured solely in applause or sales, but in showing up for each other, day after difficult day. As the years progressed, Il Volo's global success seemed, from the outside, like overnight magic. They performed at the most prestigious venues in the world. They sang for presidents and popes. They sold millions of albums. They became ambassadors of Italian music, beloved by generations. But those who looked closer, those who knew their story, understood the truth. There was nothing overnight about it. Every performance was built on years of struggle. Every note carried the weight of sacrifice. Every harmony was a testament to boys who became young men while the world watched, who fought through criticism and exhaustion and fear, who chose to continue when quitting would have been easier. Their success was not a gift. It was earned through unseen endurance, through the quiet battles no one applauded, through moments of doubt overcome in silence. The greatest achievement of Il Volo was never fame. It was surviving the journey together. It was refusing to let the pressure break them, refusing to let the industry's skepticism define them, refusing to let the loss of their childhood turn them bitter. They emerged from those early struggles not as individuals who happened to sing together, but as brothers bound by shared experience, by mutual respect, by the understanding that they had endured something extraordinary. They became stronger than the struggles meant to break them. Not because the struggles disappeared, those scars remain, those losses are real, but because they learned that strength isn't the absence of hardship. It's the choice to stand up after being knocked down. It's the decision to trust when trust feels risky. It's the commitment to keep singing when your voice shakes. In the end, Piero, Gianluca, and Ignazio are more than Il Volo. They are three boys from different parts of Italy who found each other in the chaos of competition and expectation. They are proof that childhood dreams don't come without cost, that success requires sacrifice, that fame can be both blessing and burden. But they are also proof that survival is possible, that friendship can sustain through impossible circumstances, that voices raised together can create something beautiful enough to transcend the pain required to create it. Their story is not a fairy tale. It's something more honest, more human. It's a reminder that behind every performance we admire, there are countless hours we don't see. Behind every voice that moves us, there's a person who doubted whether that voice was enough. Behind every success, there are struggles that nearly prevented it from happening at all. Il Volo's untold struggles are not separate from their achievements. They are the foundation of everything they became. And perhaps that's the most important part of their story. That the hardship wasn't in spite of their success, but essential to it. That the boys who once felt isolated, overlooked, and uncertain found strength not by avoiding difficulty, but by facing it together. That the flight was never just about rising, it was about learning how to stand again and again until standing became flying.